weeks before the 30th anniversary of the hardware store my late husband and I opened on Callaway Street, our night security guard knocked on my car window in the parking lot and told me not to go inside through the front. His name was Roy. He had worked the overnight shift at Callaway Hardware for 9 years. He was 63 years old, a quiet man who kept a thermos of decaf on the security desk and left handwritten notes for the morning crew about anything unusual he'd noticed during the night. A leaking pipe under the break room sink, a flickering bulb in aisle 7, the delivery door that needed a new seal. He was not a man who alarmed easily. He was not a man who knocked on car windows. It was a Tuesday morning in late September. I had come in early to approve the banner order for the anniversary celebration. The party was set for the 14th 200 people, clients, staff, vendors we'd worked with for 3 decades, people who had helped us survive 2 recessions, a flood in 2009 that destroyed our storage annex, and 4 years of rebuilding after my husband passed. I was just going to sign the approval form and leave. I had a dentist appointment at 10. Roy was already walking toward me before I turned off the engine. I rolled down the window. He leaned in and spoke low, the way you speak when you don't want to be heard through a wall. He said, "Miss Harriet, don't go in the front. Your son-in-law's car is here. He came in 40 minutes ago with someone I don't know. They went straight upstairs to your office." I looked past him at the building. The light in my second-floor office window was on. My office, where I kept the filing cabinet with the original lease agreements, the partnership records, the signed supplier contracts going back to 1994. Roy said, "The man he came with had a briefcase. I asked if I could help them, and your son-in-law said they were waiting for you. But he didn't look like he was waiting for me. He looked like he was looking for something." I asked Roy how long they'd been up there. He said, 40 minutes, maybe 45. I sat with that for a moment. 45 minutes is a long time to wait for someone who wasn't expecting you. I told Roy I'd go around to the receiving entrance. I asked him to stay at his desk and act like nothing had changed. He nodded once and walked back toward the building without another word. That was Roy. He understood exactly how much to do and when to stop. I parked behind a delivery bay and let myself in through the back, past the storage shelves where we kept the seasonal inventory. The store didn't open for another hour. The morning floor crew hadn't arrived yet. The building was quiet in the way old buildings are. Settling sounds. The hum of the refrigeration unit in the break room. The faint smell of machine oil and sawdust that had lived in the walls for 30 years. I climbed the back stairs slowly. My right knee has been bad since the winter. I didn't rush. The door to my office was closed but not latched. Voices came through the gap. I recognized my son-in-law's voice immediately. The second voice was a man I didn't know. Measured. Professional. The voice of someone used to conducting meetings. My son-in-law said, "She won't push back if we frame it as a retirement package. She's been saying for 2 years she wants to slow down." The other man said the valuation they'd submitted was conservative enough to pass a preliminary review, but would need to clear by Friday if they wanted the transfer window to open before the fiscal quarter ended. My son-in-law said, "That's fine, she trusts me completely. That's not going to be a problem." I stood in the hallway outside my own office and listened to my daughter's husband explain to a stranger that my trust in him was the mechanism he intended to use against me. My daughter has been married to him for 8 years. He joined the business 4 years ago, after my knee surgery, when I needed someone I could rely on to handle operations while I recovered. My daughter asked me to bring him in. She said he had a strong background in retail management, and that he genuinely wanted to help. I believed her because she believed it. I believed him because she loved him. He had reorganized our inventory system in the first year, which was real and helpful. He had renegotiated our contract with 2 regional suppliers, which saved us money. He had, slowly over the following 3 years, positioned himself as the person the staff brought problems to. First, the person the accountant called before they called me, the person vendors assumed was the decision-maker when he answered the phone. I had thought it was natural. I had thought it was the business maturing. I had thought it meant I was finally stepping back the way I had always said I would. I hadn't been stepping back. I had been stepped around. The other man in my office said the buyer was prepared to move quickly. He said that at the submitted valuation, the offer was $2.1 million. Callaway Hardware had annual revenue of just over $4 million. The building alone, which my husband and I had purchased in 2001, was assessed at $1.4 million. A fair market valuation of the business, including assets, inventory, goodwill, and real property, was somewhere between $3.8 and $4.2 million. I knew those numbers the way I know my own address. "My son-in-law's voice again," he said. "She'll think the offer is low, but I can walk her through the projections Marcus put together." He caught himself. "The projections Neil put together. She respects data. She's not going to argue if the numbers look official." The other man said something I couldn't catch. Then my son-in-law said, "After the anniversary event. She'll be emotional. It's a good time to ask." I walked back down the stairs. I sat in my car behind the delivery bay for a long time. The sky was low and white, the kind of October light that makes everything feel overexposed. I thought about my husband. We had opened the store 3 months after our youngest daughter left for college, when everyone in our lives thought we had lost our minds. 2 people in their mid-30s with no retail experience and $400 over the asking price on a lease for a storefront that had been a failing appliance repair shop. My husband had repainted the exterior himself over a long weekend in July. I had hand-lettered the first window sign. We had learned everything we needed to know from the people who walked in the door, the contractors, the homeowners, the farmers from the county line who needed parts we didn't carry yet, and taught us what to stop. 30 years, 2 floods, 1 fire, 1 grief that I didn't think I would survive, $4 million in annual revenue that I had built, maintained, and protected through all of it. And my son-in-law was in my office with a stranger and a briefcase, planning to walk me through official-looking numbers at an emotional moment. I drove to the IHOP on Route 9 and ordered coffee and sat in the corner until I could think. The first call I made was to my attorney. Her name is Beverly, not the Beverly from the file. A different one, Beverly Marsh, who had handled my husband's estate and had represented the business in a contract dispute with a supplier in 2017. She answered on the second ring, even though it was before 8 in the morning. I told her everything. When I finished, she said, "Don't sign anything. Don't let on that you know. Come to my office this afternoon and bring whatever financial records you can pull remotely. We need to know what's already been done." I asked her if we could stop it. She said that depends on how far along they are. Let's find out. That afternoon, Beverly brought in a man named Clive Ostrander. He was a forensic accountant who had spent 12 years with the IRS before going private. He was 61, compact and quiet, with reading glasses he took on and off constantly, and a habit of asking every question twice in slightly different words, as if he were testing whether your answer changed. He made me feel like I was being deposed, which was probably the point. I walked him through everything from the beginning. The early months when my son-in-law joined the business, the reorganizations, the supplier contract changes, the gradual shift in how communication flowed. The conversation I had heard that morning. Clive wrote everything down on a yellow legal pad and asked me twice about the name that had slipped, the name my son-in-law had corrected himself on. He said Marcus first, then corrected to Neil. You're sure? I was sure. Clive said he'd have something by Thursday. He told me to go home and act like nothing had changed. He said the most important thing I could do in the next 48 hours was behave exactly the way I had been behaving for the past 4 years. That night, I did not call my daughter. I sat in the kitchen of the house where we had raised 2 daughters and lived for 27 years, and I stared at the phone, and I went through every version of that conversation in my head. In every version, she defended him. Not because she was dishonest, because she was in love with him, and she had brought him into the business herself, and if what I was telling her was true, then the last 4 years of her marriage looked different than she thought they did. I was not ready to hand her that. Not yet. Not until I knew the full shape of it. Instead, I called Wanda. Wanda had been our store manager for 19 years. She had started as a part-time cashier during the Christmas rush of 2005 and had never left. She knew every supplier, every long-term client, every quirk of the inventory system, and she had watched my son-in-law operate in the store every day for 4 years with an expression I had never had the good sense to ask her about directly. I told her I needed her to pay close attention to anything unusual over the next 2 days, any documents being printed or removed, any calls taken in my office, anything that felt off without giving any indication that she was watching. There was a pause. Then she said, "Harriet, I've been watching him since his 2nd month here. I just didn't know if you were ready to hear it." She hung up before I could answer. Thursday morning, Clive called at 7:40. He said, "I need you to come in. I found enough." I drove to Beverly's office. Clive had his legal pad and 2 folders. He opened the first one. The first thing was a business entity filing. A limited liability company called Stonegate Retail Partners, registered in Wyoming 6 weeks earlier. My son-in-law's name was listed as one of 2 managing members. The second managing member was a holding company called Ashford Capital Group. Clive explained that Ashford Capital Group had been flagged in an SEC inquiry in 2021 for its role in a series of small business acquisitions conducted below fair market value. The pattern was consistent. They identified family-owned businesses in the $3 to $6 million range, worked through an inside operator to suppress the apparent value of the business in financial documentation, acquired at a steep discount, and resold or restructured within 2 years. 4 businesses in 3 states over 5 years. All of the sellers had been sole or primary owners over the age of 55. None of them had known what their business was actually worth when they signed. Callaway Hardware would have been the 5th. The second thing was a document my son-in-law had filed with our primary lender in August, a financial summary representing the store's performance over the previous 12 months. The summary showed a net revenue decline of 22%. It attributed the decline to increased regional competition and management instability following the owner's health issues. My health issues? My knee. The actual revenue figures for that same period showed an increase of 6%. We had had a strong year. The document my son-in-law had submitted to the lender was not our actual financials. It was a version he had constructed. And it had our business letterhead on it. Clive set a 3rd folder on the table. He said this one took longer to find because it had been partially sealed in a civil settlement. A woman in Boise, Idaho, 67 years old. She had owned a regional plumbing supply company for 24 years. Her operations manager, brought in by a family member with excellent references, had spent 18 months quietly building a paper record of her declining involvement in the business, submitted false financial summaries to a prospective buyer, and helped facilitate a sale at roughly 40% below the company's actual value. The operations manager had received a private commission of $280,000 at closing. The operations manager's name in that case was not Neil. But Clive had traced the Wyoming holding company from the Stonegate filing to a formation agent who had handled 3 prior entity registrations under different names. 2 of those registrations matched known associates of the Boise transaction. Clive looked at me. He said, "Whoever Neil is, he is connected to the same network. Your son-in-law may not know the full scope of it, but your son-in-law signed the Stonegate filing." Beverly spoke. "We can file for an emergency injunction to block any asset transfer before the fiscal quarter closes. We have enough documentation, but to make it airtight, we need the attempt to happen on record, with witnesses." She walked me through what that would look like. The anniversary celebration was Saturday, 12 days away. 200 guests, 30 years of history, every person who had helped build what Callaway Hardware was. My son-in-law had been helping plan the event for 2 months. He had suggested the venue, organized the catering, and offered to give a short speech. Beverly said, "Let him bring the paperwork to you at the event. Let him hand you the pen in front of witnesses. Then we move." I asked about my daughter. Beverly and Clive exchanged a look. Clive said my daughter was not listed on the Stonegate filing. He said nothing in what they had found suggested she had any knowledge of the Ashford connection or the Boise transaction. He said she was, in his word, adjacent. I drove home alone. I thought about my daughter. She was 41 years old. She had her father's stubbornness and my tendency to protect people by not telling them things they weren't ready to hear. A combination that had served her well in some ways and not at all in others. She had believed in her husband. She had brought him to me with pride and with love, and some part of her had relaxed in the years since, the way you relax when you believe the people you love are being taken care of. I didn't call her. I made dinner. I watched the evening news. I went to bed at 10 and lay awake until 2. Wanda called the next morning. She had gone in early and found something. My son-in-law had used the shared printer in the second-floor hallway the previous afternoon, after the office staff had left for the day. He had left 2 pages in the output tray. She had taken them before anyone else arrived. She read them to me over the phone. The first was an email from my son-in-law to a man named Neil, confirming that the anniversary event provided the ideal setting for the signing, that the owner, me, would be in a celebratory and emotionally open state, and that the framing as a retirement transition agreement had been refined and was ready for presentation. The second was a response from Neil confirming receipt and noting that the buyer had already prepared the wire transfer and was waiting on documentation. The email also said, and I'm going to be very precise here because the exact words mattered, "Confirm that the daughter remains unaware. We don't want any complications at the table." My daughter, unaware. Kept out of it deliberately, not because she was complicit, but because she was a complication. I sat with that for a long time. My son-in-law had not told my daughter what he was doing. He had managed her the same way he had managed me, through selective information, through the slow accumulation of a story he had built for each of us separately. He had made me believe I was stepping back gracefully. He had made my daughter believe her husband was holding the family business together. Neither story was true. Both of us had believed what we were given because we trusted the person giving it. I wrote a different toast that night. The anniversary party was held at the Callaway Street store itself. The main floor cleared and rearranged, the shelving pushed back, tables set up under string lights that Wanda and the staff had hung the previous Tuesday. 200 people in the place where we had spent 30 years. The smell of the building, oil and wood and something that was just time, was underneath everything. Beverly was at a table near the side entrance with two people I hadn't met, both of whom I understood were not there for the party. Clive was near the back. Roy, who had officially been off duty that evening, was at the door, because I had asked him to be there, and he had shown up in his good jacket without being asked twice. My son-in-law was at my side from the moment I arrived, attentive and warm in the way he was always attentive. And warm, and I watched him the way you watch something you have looked at for 4 years and are seeing for the first time. My daughter found me at 7. She hugged me and told me the room looked beautiful and that she was so proud of everything I had built. Her eyes were bright. She didn't know. I could see that she didn't know, and it made the evening feel both heavier and simpler than I expected. At 7:30, she touched my arm and pulled me slightly aside. She spoke low and fast, like someone who had been rehearsing. She said, "Mom, I need to tell you something. I overheard part of a phone call last week. I don't know what it means, but something felt wrong and I haven't been able to let it go. I heard him say the words, transition agreement, and she won't fight it. I didn't understand it. I didn't know how to ask him about it, but I needed you to know." I looked at my daughter for a long moment. I told her I already knew. I told her she didn't need to be afraid. I told her the most important thing was that she had told me. Her face did something I don't have the right words for. Relief and grief at the same time, the way a person looks when they've been right about something they desperately wanted to be wrong about. I went to the podium at 8 o'clock. I looked out at the room. 200 people, contractors I'd known for 25 years, clients who had been coming to our store since the 90s, staff who had watched my husband build the first display shelves and had stayed long enough to see his daughters grow up. Wanda near the back, arms crossed, watching me the way she always did. Roy at the door, thermos in hand. I began the way I had planned to begin. I talked about 1994. I talked about the hand-lettered window sign and the borrowed truck and the first winter when we didn't know if we would make it to spring. I talked about my husband, the way he measured everything twice, the way he stayed past closing every night to make sure the floor was swept and the register balanced, the way he believed that the only way to build something that lasted was to be honest with every person who walked through the door. I heard people laugh softly at the parts that were supposed to be funny. I saw my daughter watching me from a table near the left side of the room. Then I stopped smiling. I said, 30 years teaches you that the most dangerous threats to something you've built don't come from outside it. They come from the gaps inside it, the places where you stopped paying attention, the parts you handed to someone else and stopped checking on, the trust you gave, without making sure it had been earned all the way through. The room shifted. My son-in-law at table 4 went very still. I said 12 days ago, a man who has worked for this business for 9 years stopped me in the parking lot and told me not to go through the front door. So I went another way, and what I heard when I did changed everything I thought I understood about what was happening to this company. I looked at the screen behind me and nodded toward the AV table. Roy's nephew had been running the equipment all evening. He knew what to do. The screen lit up. The first slide was the Stonegate Retail Partners filing, my son-in-law's name, the Wyoming registration date, the Ashford Capital Group connection. I said, someone has spent the past year building a case that this store is failing, that I am no longer capable of running it, that the responsible thing, the loving thing, is for me to step back and let someone else take over. I want to show you what that case looked like on paper, and then I want to show you what is actually true. The next slide appeared. The financial summary my son-in-law had submitted to our lender in August, the one showing a 22% revenue decline. Then our actual numbers. the 6% increase, the 2 major supply contracts both renewed, the real assessed value of the property, the gap between the 2.1 million offer and the actual valuation of 3.9 million. My son-in-law stood. He said my name. His voice was level. His hands were not. Beverly stood from her table. The retired judge, who had been my husband's fraternity brother's wife and who had attended our anniversary gala for 11 consecutive years, rose from table 9. Her name was Judge Harriet Odom, a coincidence of first names that my husband had always found funny, and she said the emergency injunction was now in effect. All asset transfers associated with Stonegate Retail Partners and Ashford Capital Group were frozen as of that moment. The room went very quiet and then very loud. I said, "This is not the first time this has been done." The slide changed to the Boise case summary. I didn't use the woman's name without her permission, but I had called her on Wednesday after Clive found her. She had agreed, without hesitation, to appear. The screen shifted to a live video call. A woman sat at what looked like a kitchen table, steady and clear-eyed. She said her name. She said she was 69 years old. She said she had built her company over 24 years, and that a man with excellent references and a convincing story had spent 18 months making her doubt herself, before presenting her with paperwork on what she had believed was a good day. She looked into the camera. She said, "I wish I had known before I signed. I'm glad you found out before you did." 2 of the people Beverly had brought moved toward my son-in-law from either side of the room. He did not make a scene. He said something quiet and deliberate as they reached him. I didn't hear what it was. I didn't need to. My daughter had not moved from her chair. I stepped down from the platform and crossed the room. I sat next to her. She was looking at her hands. She said, "I didn't know." I said, "I know." She said, "I brought him here. I told you to trust him." I said, "You trusted your husband. That is not the same thing as what he did." She didn't speak for a moment. Then she said, "What do I do now?" I didn't have an answer. I told her that was a question for later. I told her that tonight we just sat here. So we did. What came after took most of the following year. My son-in-law was charged with fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and filing false financial documents with a lender. The Wyoming entity was dissolved under court order. The Ashford Capital Group connection became part of a broader federal inquiry that had been building for 2 years. Our case provided documentation that filled gaps in 3 prior investigations. Clive testified. Beverly handled the civil filing. The woman in Boise reopened her settlement when our case made the network visible. Our books were independently audited in December and certified accurate. Revenue for the following year was projected at $4.3 million. We hired a new operations manager in January, a woman named Greta, 54 years old, who had run a regional building supply chain for 16 years, and who asked harder questions in her first week than anyone had asked in the previous 4 years combined. Wanda took on a broader role in store management. She did not ask for a title change, she just started doing the work, which was how she had always operated. Roy retired in March, 2 months after the anniversary. At the small gathering we held for him in the break room, he shook his head when I tried to thank him and said he'd just done his job. I told him that what he'd done was the most important part of anyone's job. The part where you notice something is wrong, and you say so, even when it would be easier not to. He thought about that for a moment and said, "Well, I'm glad you rolled down the window. My daughter filed for divorce in February. I will not say more than that, except that she is steadier than she gives herself credit for, and she has her father's way of moving through hard things." quietly, without announcement, and without stopping. We had coffee together every Tuesday morning through the winter. We didn't always talk about any of it. Sometimes we just sat with our mugs and watched the birds at the feeder outside her window. That was enough. Most mornings, that was exactly enough. I have run this store for 30 years. I have made payroll in months when I didn't see how. I have rebuilt from a flood that took 3 months of inventory and a grief that took longer than that. I know how to keep going. That part I learned a long time ago. What I am still learning, and I say this plainly because it is true, is that the things you have built are only as safe as the relationships at the center of them, not the documents, not the financial records, not the injunctions or the audits or the certified clean books. The relationships, the people who've been there long enough to see what's true and who trust you enough to say so, even when they're not sure you're ready to hear it. Roy knocked on my car window because he had been watching that building for 9 years, and something felt wrong. Wanda saved the pages from the printer tray because she had been watching my son-in-law for 4 years, and she had been waiting for someone to ask. My daughter pulled me aside at 7:30 and told me something had felt wrong for a week, even though she hadn't understood what she was hearing. All 3 of them saw something I had stopped looking for because I had told myself I could trust the people close to me without checking. Trust and verification are not opposites. I know that now in a way I didn't know it a year ago. The people worth trusting most are usually not the ones who tell you to stop checking. They're the ones who understand why you have to. In April, I drove to the store early on a Saturday, before opening, before anyone arrived, and I stood in the main aisle for a while, the way my husband used to do on Sunday mornings when we were first starting out, just walking the floor and looking at what was there. The hand-lettered sign from the first window is framed on the wall near the register. My husband put it there in the second year. He said it was important to remember what things looked like before you knew what you were doing, because that was the only time you were fully paying attention. I stood in that aisle and thought about that. About attention. About what we see when we're not protecting anything yet, and what we stop seeing once we think we've secured it. The store opens at 8. I was there at 6:30. That is where I have always been. That is where I intend to stay. What I keep coming back to, more than the injunction or the court dates or any of the paperwork, is Roy standing in that parking lot at 7 in the morning, walking toward my car before I'd even turned off the engine. He didn't have to do that. It wasn't in his job description. There was no policy requiring him to knock on the window of the woman who signed his paychecks and tell her something was wrong. He did it because he was paying attention, and because paying attention, really paying attention, over 9 years to a building and the people who moved through it had taught him the difference between ordinary and off. That's the thing nobody tells you about loyalty. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up at 7 in the morning with a thermos of decaf and an uncomfortable truth. I have spent a lot of time since then thinking about what I missed and why I missed it. I was not careless. I was not naive. I had run a business for 30 years, made hard calls, rebuilt from loss more than once. What I was, and what I think many people who have built something over a long time become, is certain. Certain that I knew who the people around me were. Certain that the trust I had extended had been received the way I intended it. Certain enough that I stopped checking. And that certainty, that quiet, accumulated confidence, is exactly what my son-in-law counted on. He didn't create a weakness in my judgment. He found one that was already there and made a door out of it. The gap between what I believed about him and what was actually happening existed because I had stopped asking questions I thought I already knew the answers to. Wanda had been watching him for 4 years. 4 years of noticing, of filing things away, of waiting to be asked. She said it herself. She didn't know if I was ready to hear it, and so she stayed quiet, not out of cowardice, but out of a kind of careful love that understood I had to come to the truth myself, or I wouldn't be able to hold it. When I finally asked, she was ready in about 30 seconds. That is not a small thing. The people who stay, who keep showing up, who hold what they know until you're ready, they are not passive. They are doing something that requires both discipline and faith. They are trusting that the moment will come. They are keeping the light on. My daughter did the same thing. She heard half a phone call and sat with her unease for a week, turning it over, not knowing what it meant, not wanting to be wrong, not wanting to be right, and then, at 7:30 on the night of the party, she found me and told me anyway. That took more courage than I have ever given her credit for. It is easy to speak when you're certain. It costs something real to speak when you're not. What I have learned at 63, running a store that is still open and still mine, is that the strength of anything you build is measured not by how well it performs in good years, but by the quality of the people standing inside it when something goes wrong. Skill matters, strategy matters, but character, the willingness to tell the truth when it's inconvenient, to stay steady when staying steady is hard, to keep watch without being asked, that is the thing that holds. I think about Earl sometimes, though I call him Roy in this story. I think about what it cost him nothing to look the other way. He could have gone back to his desk. He could have decided it wasn't his business. The path of least resistance was right there, and he walked past it. He knocked on my window instead. Some days that is the whole story. The rest is just what happened because he did.